What's going on, sports fans, and welcome to the MacGuffin Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Hargrove, and today I am joined by Tyler Budge, the creator of the Sports MacGuffin concept and the tracker of the College Football MacGuffin. We're discussing our experiences in researching the MacGuffin and much more. Let's get right into it.
First, how did you get the idea to apply the MacGuffin to college football?
Yeah, so it didn't necessarily start as the idea itself. It started with a love and a passion for college football. So, college football is just something I was always super passionate about, and something I obviously liked a lot. And I remember it was a couple summers ago. Had to have been. It was actually probably a little before COVID, surprisingly, because this seems like the type of idea that would have happened during all the downtime of COVID. But I basically was kind of just thinking and trying to apply ways of thinking that I've had to college football because it's something that I'm so passionate about. And I remember when I initially had the idea for the MacGuffin, I couldn't even really put it into words, and I was trying to explain it to my dad. I was like, hey, what if there was an award for the team that won the first game, and then the next team won? I tried to explain it. I literally couldn't explain it to him, and he was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so I was like, well, let me just start doing it then. So I just started doing it, tracking it through all the old Wikipedia and sports reference pages and whatnot, and then eventually it started to click for him. So yeah, that's pretty much how that came to be.
Cool. Yeah, I was initially when I started mine, I had the same thing where it was I tried to explain it to one of my parents, and they were just like, "What the heck are you talking about?" And so then I was like, "Yeah, let me jump into it." So yeah, the next question sort of is, what was your research process like?
Yeah, so the research process is not an exact science, and that's one of the main things that I think I had to grasp early on, especially when you're going through some of the early years. It's funny because when you start in 1869, it's not super difficult because it's very notable games. It's the first game ever played between Rutgers and Princeton, well documented, all that stuff. And even the next couple years aren't too hard to track because it's well documented, all that stuff. But the second you have the MacGuffin go to some obscure team or school, that's when it starts to get tricky, when either the school wasn't tracking whether they won or lost games that year, or they didn't have a yearbook, or there's no Wikipedia page or no sports reference page. That's when you have to get a little bit more creative. And all those things that I just listed, sports reference, Wikipedia, old yearbooks, old excerpts and photos and news stories, just anything you can get your hands on to keep it going. Luckily, it's a lot easier when you're talking about the winners because history tends to track the winners better. I don't know if you saw, I made a video a while ago on it, but tried to track the reverse MacGuffin, and that was the losers. So that took a significantly longer bit of time to figure out and was also much more flawed. So it is helpful to be tracking the winners of history.
Yeah, so that was another one of my questions, was what resources did you use? But you kind of answered that already. But yeah, so I had some similar experiences. So the first game I took it from was the first 5-on-5 basketball game between Iowa and Chicago, and Chicago played maybe 4 games in 1896, and then basketball wasn't very popular there, so they suspended their program until 1903, and then didn't play any major programs until 1907, then won another 6 games, then lost it to Wisconsin, but it bounced back and forth around the Big Ten for probably a good until 1922, I think, when Indiana lost it to Franklin College, which was another rabbit hole that I had to go down because it's D3 school had no record of anything back then. So I ended up using just this research paper that some high schooler from Indiana had written about the Franklin College Wonder Five.
That's pretty crazy, man. I mean, college basketball is a whole different monster with the length of the season, the number of teams that there are. That I can't even imagine Like tracking 12 games sometimes felt overwhelming, but tracking as much as 30 per season, that's got to be crazy.
Yeah, I think the most I've had so far was like 1994 when no team wanted it, and it bounced around like I think 37 different times. But
Crazy, man.
yeah, so how long did it take you to go through? You said the first season was like 1860 something. So how long did it take you to get caught up to present day?
Yeah, so it was 1869 was the first year, and something that's actually really helpful about the first like 30 or so years is the fact that the seasons were very short. They were like 1 or 2 games long, which was really nice up till you get to around the 1900s. Then they start to expand to like 9, 10 games until they got to like 11, which of course was the standard up until like the early 2000s. Now we do 12 games. It probably took me a couple months, but I wasn't necessarily doing it every day. I did have a lot of free time. I think it was like before the start of like my freshman year of high school or something. So I took a lot of breaks, and I would just, put a few hours in doing it every once in a while. But like overall, as far as like just time specifically focused on it, a decent amount of time, because you've got to make sure and verify all the stats are correct. And obviously if you mess up one time, the whole thing gets thrown off. And so it also matters that the type of data you're trying to track. And the main stuff I prioritized was whether the game was home or away, what the score was, and what the team's rankings were at the time, and the date as well, obviously. But it was all about prioritizing what things to include, because as you start to expand the range of things you include, it gets harder and harder to track those things, and it becomes more time consuming. So maybe one day I'll go back in the sheet and make it a little bit more detailed, but as things currently stand, I think that the bare bones, just who had it, whether it was home and away, and what the score is plenty good enough for me.
Yeah, so I have it, like my format, I have it as like the date, and then the winning team, the losing team, the score, and then I have like the score differential, and like for each decade, I have the average score of each decade, and then like the new holder of the MacGuffin, and then just like a side area for some notes, like if it went to overtime or like sanctions or whatnot. So that's kind of segueing into my next question. So like a few years ago, Notre Dame was ordered by the NCAA to vacate its wins from 2012 and 2013. So did Notre Dame hold the MacGuffin at any point during those seasons?
I would have to double check the sheet, which I actually have it right here. But as far as the NCAA vacating wins, and this kind of goes beyond the MacGuffin itself and more into a general philosophy thing, I think the NCAA vacating wins is the stupidest and just softest thing ever. So it looks like, Notre Dame did not hold it during that time. But it's a game we all already witnessed happen, and we all know happened. And so for the NCAA to think it has the power to just say, oh, poof, that didn't happen anymore, that doesn't apply to real life, I think, and it doesn't apply to the MacGuffin for sure. So the MacGuffin ignores the NCAA in that regard.
Okay, cool. So I had some similar situations with Kentucky in like the 80s, and I think Minnesota in the 90s, where they had recruiting violations. So the NCAA sanctioned them, had their wins vacated. Like I think Minnesota had one of their entire seasons vacated, but they played in 2 MacGuffin games that season, and I was like utterly confused about what to do. So I just gave them like what I call the honorary MacGuffin, where they have it for that game, but then it just goes back to the team they beat, which, I mean, an argument could be made Minnesota should have had it, but like I guess I approached the vacated wins differently than you did.
I like that. I like the honorary MacGuffin thing. That's cool.
Yeah, so then I did that with like City College of New York in the 50s when they won the national championship, but then I couldn't find any record of their season. Like no sports reference, nothing like that. So like what was your did you use a lot of like the team schedule websites, or, what did you mainly use?
I did use a lot of the team schedule websites. I think the main thing I used was Pro Football Focus. I think that's the one that I used the most. And then I also used a lot of the Yeah, so from time to time, I use the team schedule websites. Those were actually pretty helpful. Those were especially helpful in the reverse MacGuffin search. Not as much the MacGuffin search because, like I said, it was a little bit easier to find those things. But going directly to the team athletic websites and going into their archives is something that's pretty effective. The way I had to reverse engineer it sometimes is a program would be so poverty that they weren't showing up and they didn't even have their own athletic website anymore. So you would have to find a conference opponent at the time and go back and find their schedule from that year and almost reverse engineer it to be like, okay, they won that game on October 12th. They won that game on October 7th. Lost that game on October 2nd. Okay, that's probably it, but you got to check before then to double check they didn't lose before then. So things got a little bit scuffed as you went back and looked, but yeah, no, I did delve into those websites a little bit as well.
Cool. Yeah, I love the media guides and the record books for the big time schools who kept those all the way back until the beginning of their programs. Although it was kind of annoying because I was doing it on my iPad at one point and the page kept crashing for, I think it was North Carolina's, and their all-time records started on page 200 something, so I'd have to scroll back down each time, and then halfway down it would crash, so I'd have to do it again. And then so that was frustrating for me. So yeah, were there any anything like that was just super frustrating for you?
Sure, yeah, plenty of times. Just whenever there was missing data or you started to realize this is going to be a little bit harder to find than I thought, and you start phrasing it in 18 different ways, 1997, or I guess that would be better, 1955 Duke Blue Devils schedule, full schedule, putting in keywords, trying to make sure you get the right result. But yeah, man, it's all for the love of the MacGuffin, man. It's all worth it for the nice reception it gets. But there's certainly several times you wonder, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself through this? And it just gives you a headache and you just want to stop. And I think that's one of the reasons it took me a couple months to make the initial spreadsheet at the start, because it's not something you can just sit down and hammer out all at once. But, time will pass either way, whether you're working on the MacGuffin or you're not, so you might as well be researching it.
Yeah. I know, so I started it in July. I was not entirely sure how long it would take. I certainly didn't think I would be still doing it to this point, because I didn't think the seasons would be, so long. I was very surprised at how long. The season seems so much longer when you're, going through game by game and trying to, nitpick each one. But yeah, so...
That's got to be the tricky part about college basketball, is they're not neatly fit into weeks. So you can have 5 transfers in a week if you get it timed right, which that's got to be stretching it out. Now you said you got up to 37 games in one. That's one of the reasons I didn't want to try and tackle other sports. I was thinking NBA, no way, man. College basketball, no way. MLB, don't even get me started. That would be hell, unless there was some sort of way to automate that. But if there is, it's too smart for me. So the only one I even thought about was the NFL, but there's a guy on Twitter who actually does that, NFL MacGuffin. He's pretty good at doing that as well.
Yeah, I also considered MLB, and the one thing I got hung up on was, do you do it by series or do you do it game by game? Because
True.
If you're in a 3-game series, you could win the first one and win the MacGuffin, lose the second one, lose it back, and it'd be so many more. It'd be 3 times more transfers in one season than if you did by series. But that'd be splitting it up by series would be a whole other monster.
Yeah, some poor chap on Twitter, God rest his soul, was trying to do the MLB one, and he got to I don't even know, the 30s or something like that. I think he gave up. So if anyone wanted to start, I'm sure he might surrender his data. But it's cool. There's a lot of MacGuffin communities online. There's I know somebody's got an NFL one. I know somebody, like I said, tried to do an MLB one. I know somebody's got an NBA MacGuffin. There's, I think somebody started a USFL MacGuffin or AF.
Interesting.
Whatever the other one was, the XFL, which was pretty fun to watch as well. So I'm curious to see how they'll handle the merger, because I know those two are merging. But there's lots of fun MacGuffin content out there if you know where to find it.
Yeah, so that's like, so am I the first person you've seen to try and conquer college basketball, or have you seen other ones?
I can't actually remember. I think I may have seen one, but I don't know if they ever got to the present day. I'm pretty sure they gave up, actually. So that's the question. Have you made it all the way to the present day?
So I made it right now. I'm at the end of the 2002-2003 season. So I've got, I don't know, like 20 more years to go before present day. And like, okay, so when I was, so I'm a big Duke fan because my dad went to Duke and I like grew up rooting for Duke. So like when I got bored by it over the summer, my like thing that was keeping me going was the satisfaction of like putting Duke as the national champion. And so like 91, 92, 2001, 2010, and 2015, like those timelines are keeping me going. So shifting gears a little bit, I've noticed throughout my research that the MacGuffin usually ends up with a national champion because it gets filtered into March Madness. And there are only a few instances in which that wasn't the case. One of them being the Minnesota recruiting violations. And then like there's 1 year in the 40s where it ended up in the NIT. And then another 40s year where Wyoming had it, and then the next season didn't have a season because of World War II. But like aside from those seasons, it's ended up in March Madness. And so my question here is, with the college football playoff, has that like affected it, given that there's only 4 CFP teams?
Yeah, so the playoff it surprisingly hasn't affected it too much. I think it has been in the playoffs a few times, though. I want to say 2 or 3 times it's been in the playoffs since it was implemented. But since it's such a limited field of just 4, it's not something you typically have seen. I believe the last time it made its way to the playoff was 2020. That was when Alabama took it. So it's been a couple years where it hasn't made its way there, with how Washington's playing it's right now. And well, I mean, with Washington, because they have the MacGuffin right now, the Pac-12 just typically doesn't get them in, and it can't leave the Pac-12 unless it goes through a very specific path through USC to Notre Dame. But actually, I think that may have passed, because I think the only way for that to happen was if they lost to Arizona. So honestly, the current field hasn't affected that very much. It'll be interesting to see how that changes when they expand to 12. I suspect a lot more of the MacGuffin going into the 12-team playoff. But I mean, you look at where it's been recently, and there's still a decent amount of teams that held it that would not have made it in a 12-team playoff. I think back to Ole Miss in 2021, who ended the season with it. They probably wouldn't have been in the 12-team playoff. So there, I think, is still plenty of wiggle room for the college football MacGuffin to not necessarily go to the national champion every year.
That's cool. I like that. It's kind of gotten like a little bit tiresome being like, oh, it's going to this conference champion who gets an AQ to March Madness. So then it just siphons down to the national champion, which I mean, I think the national champion deserves it at the end of each season, but it's also like, sometimes I'm like, what if like it ended up with a shitty team who didn't play very well but managed to win their last game? But like the only way I've seen that happen is with recruiting violations and like vacated wins, wars, just extreme cases, which is kind of frustrating for me. But in the end, it's fun to keep searching about the MacGuffin. It's a great time.
It is a great time, I agree. And the people love it.
Yeah, it seems like it's a big hit on TikTok. And like, I mean, you're in the hundreds of thousands of views for each video, like same range for likes.
Yeah, yeah, people seem to really connect with the idea, which makes me feel good because there was a time where I didn't know if anyone cared, and I actually, I mean, I never hadn't shared the idea until October of last. We're actually coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the MacGuffin being made public because it was made public October 12th of last year.
Cool.
So 1-year anniversary of that is just 9 days away. But yeah, there was a time where I didn't know if anyone did care about the MacGuffin, but it's now a key aspect of my brand and identity, and one of the things I owe a lot of my content blowing up to. So
Yeah, I've been, so when I've tried to explain it to people, I've been wholly unsuccessful until I show them your video about what it is, and your analogy to the golden idol in Indiana Jones, that makes it click in everybody who I've explained it to's brain, and they're like, oh, that makes a lot more sense.
yeah, that's so funny, man. It's crazy how that video is still the reference point. I thought about making a new one, like a new explanation video, but it's just so vintage. I don't have the heart to take it down.
Yeah, I don't know how you could. I mean, I think it's a staple for your brand at this point.
That was Tyler Budge, the creator of the Sports MacGuffin concept and tracker of the College Football MacGuffin. That's all the time we have for the MacGuffin podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great rest of your day.